while, about a year, but let's go ahead and continue our talk about the Mystery Case Files games with the next game, Fate's Carnival. You get called in to investigate an anomaly in the countryside. That anomaly turns out to be, oddly enough, Fate's Carnival, which we haven't visited since the fourth game of the series, Madam Fate. As you explore the out-of-nowhere carnival, you begin to find the various employees trapped in torturous traps. It falls to you to free these employees from these traps and to stop the rise of a new villain, Charles Dalamar's father, Alistair. Madam Fate, the game where Fate's Carnival first appeared, was made back before the creators started shifting their focus from just the hidden object part to more story-driven plots. As such, you never really walked around Fate's Carnival. I talked about this back when I talked about Madam Fate, but basically it was just you saw a map and you click on a scene and you go to that scene. And then when you're done with that, you go back to the map and it just kind of goes that way. This game actually allows you to walk through Fate's Carnival, and while it is hard to say how much of it is the same as the actual Fate's Carnival from Madam Fate, just because of various supernatural stuff going on, it is still nice to be able to walk through, and it gives it a more realistic feel. One of the positives from Madam Fate is the characters, and that goes for this game as well. While not all of the characters from Madam Fate come back for Fate's Carnival, quite a lot of them do. And this game has the added bonus of voice acting, with a lot of the characters having dialogue with you. All the voice actors do a great job with the characters they're supposed to portray, and no one feels out of place. One of the unique elements to this game is Madam Fate's cat, Isis. She's given to you at the beginning of the game, and she stays with you throughout. She's there to help you reach things you wouldn't otherwise be able to reach. She's a good kitty. Finally, this game does a very good job of casting everything under this sense of dread. Even before the main villain shows himself, there's this uneasiness that's with you from the moment you start up the game. Once you start finding the employees, this feeling only grows up to the moment when Alistair hits the scene. Kudos to the game for that. This is really the game where the Dalamar timeline starts getting really, really weird. We got a little bit of wonkiness from Escape from Ravenhurst, but this is just where it really starts to fall off the rails. Apparently, Alistair and Madam Fate had quite the rivalry. It's actually a really big part of this game. It's arguably one of the most important parts of this game. The problem with this is that Alistair is from the early 1800s, and we were called in to help Madam Fate in the late 2000s. My first instinct is that these games just weren't taking place in a modern time, but we do find out in a later game that Madam Fate takes place the same year it came out, which was in the late 2000s. So, Madam Fate died in the late 2000s, and yet was somehow able to have a rivalry with Charles Dalamar's father, who we know is from the late 1800s. They never really explain how this is possible, and it just kind of seems like the creators of this game were trying to make this connection between the Dalamars and Madam Fate, even though they hadn't originally planned on having that connection. And finally, one of my biggest problems with this is the main villain, Alistair. While Alistair is certainly threatening, at the end of the day, he's just not that interesting. He's just like Charles, but more evil. He's not as bad in this game as he becomes in later games, probably because later games focus on him more, but he's just a bad guy with no real nuance. Add to that the fact that he gets rid of pretty much any chance of Charles coming back, and I get very strong Arthur from Heroes vibes from him. Namely the fact that the boring villain takes out the more interesting one, and so now we have to focus more on the boring villain. Overall, though, I do think this is a very solid entry into the Mystery Case Files repertoire. As long as you can overlook the shaky timeline additions and the slightly boring villain, which I can, this is a very enjoyable and wonderfully unsettling experience. I would give this game an 8.